Before Eve, there was a woman who dared to say no to Adam. Have you heard of her? Her name is Lilith, and for centuries it was whispered only between the lines of history, like an uncomfortable secret no one wanted you to know. What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because this isn't just the story of a forgotten woman. It's the account of how feminine power was shaped, erased, and rewritten to fit the limits someone else imposed. Stay with me until the end, because what lies behind this silence reveals so much more about the ancient world and about what still happens today. Imagine a figure created from the exact same matter as Adam, with the same value, the same right to speak, the same breath of life. A woman not made from a rib, not as a complement, but as an equal. This was Lilith, and according to ancient traditions, she refused to accept the idea of being dominated, not in love, not in life, not even by the laws that sought to shape her. It was this boldness that ignited a conflict that would span millennia, and that would lead to her name being removed from the texts that shaped the faith of billions of people. But why would anyone be so afraid of a story like this? The answer lies in the way ancient societies dealt with women who defied rules. Lilith wasn't just erased, she was transformed. The figure of the free woman who wouldn't bow her head became a demon of the night, a temptress, a danger to men and children. Have you ever noticed how often female characters in history are portrayed as sinners when they dare to break the mold? It's no coincidence. Most intriguingly, traces of Lilith's presence appear in cultures that predate the Bible itself. In Sumerian legends, we find Lilitu, a woman associated with sensuality and independence, a spirit who moved between the sacred and the profane. In Babylonian imagination, her image is intertwined with goddesses of fertility and war, such as Ishtar. Could the biblical Lilith actually be an adapted reflection of powerful deities who troubled the emerging patriarchy? Consider the impact this narrative would have had if it were in the canonical texts. A woman who chose freedom over submission, who preferred to abandon Eden rather than live without a voice. If this story had been told from the beginning, how many ideas about the role of women in the world would have changed? How many times have you wondered why certain biblical passages seem incomplete, as if there were something hidden between the lines? Lilith's presence, or rather her absence, raises another question. Who decides what enters and what doesn't enter the sacred books? Who has the power to choose which stories deserve to be preserved and which should disappear? It's not just a theological detail, it's a power struggle, a filter that shapes how we view the divine and the human. And in Lilith's case, this filter transformed a free woman into a symbol of danger. But what if the real Lilith wasn't the monster we were told she was? What if behind the demonized figure there was a real woman with enough desires, choices, and courage to face even the first man on earth? This possibility changes everything, and perhaps that's why so many have preferred to keep the story in the shadows. Now I want to delve even deeper into this mystery, because understanding who Lilith was and why she was erased can reveal a lot about the play of power, desire, and silence that shaped the Bible and continues to shape our view of women today. And perhaps this is precisely where I want to hear from you, because this isn't just an ancient, distant, and untouchable story. It speaks to things that still happen today, to the voices that are silenced, to the stories that never reach us. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. Which part of this narrative most resonated with your perception of Lilith and the way female figures have been portrayed throughout time? When you comment, it's not just a loose opinion among many others. It's a piece that helps build a space where this conversation continues, where others can also recognize and reflect. And if this exchange is important to you, liking the video is a simple yet powerful way to show that this type of content deserves to exist. That's what makes YouTube deliver this topic to more people. People who may never have heard of Lilith, and who, upon learning about it, may have their perspective transformed. And of course, if this is your first time here, or if you've been following along and feel that these uncensored stories about the Bible and its forgotten characters need to continue being told, subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss out when we reveal new layers of this and so many other stories that have remained in the shadows. Because deep down, what we're doing here is much more than telling a curious story. It's recovering voices, symbols, and truths that have been buried. And to continue unearthing, each gesture, the comment, the like, the subscription, is a brick in this collective construction. Now, Let's return to Lilith's path, because there are parts of this story that are still hidden beneath layers of fear, power, and desire. Few people know, but there is a parallel genesis, a forgotten backstory of creation, where the story doesn't begin with the familiar image of Adam asleep and God fashioning Eve from his rib. In this other account, found in ancient texts, such as the Ben Sira alphabet, and echoed in Sumerian and Babylonian traditions, Adam's first wife didn't come from a part of him. She came from the same clay, molded at the same time, receiving the same breath of life. This changes everything, because it's no longer a matter of complement or auxiliary, but of full equality from the very first moment. And it is precisely there that the discomfort that would last for millennia begins. Imagine the scene: two beings made of the same matter, walking side by side in Eden, with no established natural hierarchy. In the oldest Hebrew traditions, Lilith and Adam were different in temperament, but equal in essence. She didn't see herself as property, and this independent mindset clashed with the order they wanted to establish. What could have been the basis of a relationship of mutual respect became a battleground where every gesture carried political, spiritual, and even symbolic meaning. What's intriguing is that, when we delve into the cultural influences of the time, we realize this isn't an isolated story. Neighboring civilizations already told of female figures raised alongside their male counterparts, but who chose their own paths, escaping imposed roles. In Sumerian myth, for example, Lilith appears as an entity that straddles desire and danger, carrying attributes of fertility and transgression. These images weren't erased by chance. There was a movement of transformation, almost a narrative engineering to reshape powerful female figures into symbols of threat or sin. What's most fascinating is that, even with the weight of religious institutions shaping what would or wouldn't be told, pieces of this story survived like sparks hidden in the margins of official texts. They appear as notes in manuscripts, whispers in oral traditions, subtle allusions in ancient rituals. It's as if the figure of Lilith has traversed the centuries, hidden beneath veils, but always ready to emerge wherever there's room to. Question the official version, and it's not hard to understand why she was so disturbing. If the first woman was created exactly like man, without subordination, this sets a dangerous precedent for any system based on control. This possibility becomes even more provocative when we remember that, according to these texts, Lilith's refusal to accept an inferior position was not an isolated act, but a conscious decision, a strategic choice in a silent struggle for autonomy. When considering this, it's impossible not to notice the impact this narrative has on how we view roles, relationships, and even sacred laws themselves. It's not just religion or mythology, but a social construct that has spanned generations, shaping mindsets and defining who would have a voice and who would be silenced. Behind this story lies a hidden truth that connects spirituality, politics, and power in a way few dare discuss. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the path Lilith took after leaving Adam reveals not only her strength, but also the erasure mechanism used against figures who dared to break with the established order. And this, perhaps, is the key to understanding why she still provokes such fascination and discomfort. It was at this point that the relationship between Lilith and Adam ceased to be merely a cohabitation in paradise and became a silent battlefield, where every gesture carried the weight of a principle. The ancient narrative describes how, when they lay together, Adam demanded that Lilith be on the bottom, a detail that at first glance might seem trivial, but which carried profound symbolism. The imposition of a physical position as a reflection of a spiritual and social hierarchy. Lilith refused, not out of whim but out of conviction. She argued that, having been created from the same clay, she possessed the same value, the same rights, and should not submit to a condition of inferiority. This refusal wasn't just an act of intimacy. It was a political act, a break with the logic that would shape centuries of patriarchal thinking. It's as if, in that instant, she realized that giving in would mean accepting an order that would permanently relegate her to a lower position, not just in bed, but in life. Lilith's resistance exposed a fissure in the very ideal of Edenic harmony, revealing that absolute equality between men and women wasn't actually envisioned in the power structure being formed behind the scenes. Interestingly, beyond the official Bible, many versions of this moment are more graphic and explicit. describing dialogues charged with tension and desire. Kabbalistic texts, for example, show Lilith confronting Adam with calculated coldness, reminding him that neither of them was superior to the other, neither in flesh nor in spirit. It is in this contrast between implicit eroticism and ideological clash that much of the fascination with her figure resides. She didn't simply seduce, she questioned the very fabric. And it was precisely this stance that sealed her fate. To defy Adam was, in a way, to defy the Creator himself, for she rejected the established order. For a system that depended on female submission as part of social equilibrium, Lilith's attitude was a threat that needed to be neutralized. Here, we're not just talking about a marital argument, but a rupture that would echo as a warning to all women who came after. Questioning would cost dearly. What's most intriguing is considering the impact this decision had on Lilith's journey. By saying no, she didn't just break a rule, she broke the logic that her role was to conform to the desires of others, and this initial freedom, though it cost her expulsion from paradise, also freed her to decide her own path. The act that scribes and religious figures would later call rebellion was perhaps for her the beginning of a conscious transformation, a deliberate choice to live outside the narrative they wanted to write for her. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened after this rupture reveals not only Lilith's strength, but also the cruel mechanism used to transform her from equal to enemy, from woman to demon. A change that was not only theological, but also psychological, shaping centuries of fear and desire around her name. Leave a comment below. My voice will not be silenced. When Lilith decided she would not kneel, not only before Adam, but before any structure that placed her in an inferior position, the rupture became inevitable. The oldest versions describe how, after the argument, she pronounced the sacred name and left Eden of her own free will, an act so bold that for the scribes, it could not go unpunished. This voluntary departure was portrayed not as freedom, but as betrayal, and here begins the calculated transformation of a woman into a monster. In the surviving texts outside the biblical canon, Lilith's fate takes on darker tones. She leaves the garden and approaches borderlands, places where the light of Eden cannot reach. There, according to Kabbalistic traditions, she encounters supernatural entities, fallen spirits, and forces associated with night and desire. What was autonomy was reinterpreted as corruption. What was choice was labeled an alliance with evil. Her journey needed to be rewritten to serve as a warning. Every woman who defied the established order would meet the same fate. This process was not only theological, but symbolic. The myth began to depict her as a dangerous seductress, capable of luring men in their sleep, provoking uncontrollable desires, and later, even stealing or killing children. It was no coincidence that her name began to appear on amulets used to protect newborns, as if she were the embodiment of an invisible threat that stalked homes and families. Transforming Lilith into a demon of the night was not just a way to punish her, it was a mechanism to reinforce fear. The most disturbing detail is realizing that this narrative metamorphosis functioned as social engineering. Demonizing Lilith was a way to domesticate the popular imagination. A free, sensual woman who chooses her own destiny could inspire others, but a feared creature, associated with death and chaos, would serve to dispel any sympathy. It's the use of mythology as a tool of control, shaping mindsets through a conveniently told story. Still, there's something fascinating about the persistence of her name. Even after centuries of vilification, Lilith continued to appear in fragments, legends, and rituals. Her archetype survived as a shadow and a whisper, a reminder that feminine power, even when distorted, never completely disappears. It's almost as if the attempt to erase her had the opposite effect. It immortalized her in the collective memory, albeit as a villain. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding how this image was shaped and distorted can reveal not only the intention behind the punishment, but also what was tried to hide about who Lilith really was. Comment there. Silence is also a weapon. The curious thing is that the figure of Lilith did not emerge in isolation, nor was she an invention exclusive to Hebrew tradition. Before being demonized, she already carried traits inherited from much older cultures, whose stories were intertwined in the trade routes and religious chants of the Middle East. In Sumerian records, for example, Lilitu appears, a female spirit associated with the winds and the night, described as possessing mesmerizing beauty and a disturbing presence. She was not merely a seductress, but an entity that represented both fertility and independence, capable of inspiring reverence and fear at the same time. The connection between Lilith and Lilith is inescapable, and when one delves into the surviving clay tablets, the connection becomes even clearer. In many of these representations, she appears with wings, bird of prey feet, and an upright posture, staring at her observer without lowering her eyes, a posture that, for the ancient world, conveyed power and authority. This was not the body of a servant, it was the body of a sovereign, but in the transition to the Judeo-Christian narrative, these elements were reinterpreted, molded so that strength became a threat and autonomy was read as sin. The goddess Ishtar, worshipped in Mesopotamia, adds another layer to this transformation. Ishtar was the mistress of love, war, and fertility, a deity who, like Lilith, crossed moral and emotional boundaries. Her myths depicted her making decisions that defied gods and men, and this control over her own body and destiny was not only tolerated, it was celebrated. By transposing these figures into a monotheistic context that sought to centralize power and redefine roles, much of the brilliance of these divine women was dimmed. What was once seen as a creative force became described as a destructive force. Eroticism, once associated with life and prosperity, became a trap and perdition. This shift didn't happen by chance. It reflects a calculated adjustment in the collective mindset, where female sexuality ceased to be a source of blessing and began to be seen as something to be controlled, monitored, and punished. The image of Lilith itself, bearing remnants of Lilith and Ishtar, is the perfect portrayal of this symbolic engineering, a fusion of feminine archetypes that, to survive, needed to be rewritten as villains. And here's the most intriguing part. This fusion of myths and symbols hasn't completely erased the original essence. Behind the scenes of the story, in the details that escaped censorship, it's still possible to find fragments that reveal a hidden truth, a line of continuity between goddesses and demons, between the altar and the shore. It's as if, beneath the layers of fear and condemnation, the same heart of sovereignty and desire that moved these ancient figures still beat. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding this cultural transformation can reveal not only what was taken from these women, but also what remained within them as a seed of power, despite all efforts to erase them. Lilith's sexuality, in the earliest versions of her story, was neither shy nor submissive. She carried an eroticism that didn't ask for permission, that didn't adapt to the other's rhythm, and this, for the male mindset of the time, was a profound challenge. It wasn't just about the physical act, but what it represented: control over one's own body, over one's own desire, and above all, the freedom to decide when and how to surrender. In societies where honor and possession were measured by male dominance over women, a figure like Lilith was a living threat to order. This fear was not just intimate, it was political. A free eroticism meant that women could not be reduced to currency, would not allow themselves to be molded by marital alliances, would not accept their role as controlled reproducers. Therefore, in the surviving texts, we see a careful process of transforming this freedom into danger. The body that once symbolized fertility was described as a trap. The pleasure that was once a blessing came to be seen as poison. Lilith became the incarnation of the woman who leads men to ruin, not with a sword, but with a look. This narrative strategy is ancient and appears in diverse cultures. When one's strength cannot be controlled, a myth is created to make others fear that strength. In the case of Lilith, the implicit eroticism in the texts served not to exalt her vitality, but to create an archetype of deadly seduction, a warning disguised as a story. Over the centuries, this pattern repeated itself. Women who challenged sexual or marital norms were labeled as dangerous, witches, sacred prostitutes, or temptresses, always bearing the burden of blame for the fall of men. The most disturbing thing is that, even in this process of demonization, Lilith's seduction never completely disappeared. The same qualities that made her feared also made her fascinating. It's as if, behind the scenes of the narrative, there was a tacit recognition that her power could not be completely destroyed, only rewritten. This ambiguity, a mixture of desire and fear, is what keeps her image alive to this day, hovering between the forbidden and the irresistible. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because understanding how this combination of fascination and dread was used to shape mindsets can reveal a lot about the mechanisms that transform freedom into sin and power into threat. The moment Lilith decides to leave Eden is not just an escape, it is a declaration. By pronouncing the sacred name and crossing the garden's boundaries, she was not only distancing herself from Adam or God, but also breaking with an entire structure that sought to shape her existence. The price of this decision was high, losing the comfort, security, and promise of eternity that paradise offered. But for her, living imprisoned would be a slow death, while solitude outside Eden, however harsh, was still freedom. This choice wasn't the result of blind impulse. On the contrary, it bears the mark of a strategic mindset. Lilith knew that by leaving, she would cease to be the first woman and become the dangerous woman, but she chose to bear this title and maintain her autonomy. It is in this gesture that we find the essence of her pact with freedom, accepting risk, marginalization, and even condemnation to avoid being bowed down. Walking alone into unknown lands, Lilith enters a symbolic territory that few ancient female figures dared to inhabit. Outside of Eden, there were no pre-established rules governing how a woman should behave. This absence of boundaries gave her space to reinvent herself, but also confronted forces that would test her limits. Ancient texts suggest that she began to live with creatures and entities that, like her, lived on the margins of divine order. There, far from watchful eyes, Lilith not only survived, she constructed a new identity. This moment is pivotal because it reverses the logic that has so often shaped female stories. Instead of being defined by the man to whom she was attached, Lilith defines herself by the act of detachment, and this rupture resonates to this day as an archetype of female freedom, inspiring everything from social movements to artistic representations that portray her not as a victim, but as the creator of her own destiny. Of course, for official religious discourse, this freedom could not be celebrated. It needed to be cloaked in warnings, associated with danger, perdition, and spiritual death. But beneath this punitive layer, what remains is the portrait of a woman who chose her own path when all other paths were denied her. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding what Lilith built for herself outside of Eden can reveal that far from being just a story of punishment, her journey is also a narrative of transformation and hidden power. The silence surrounding Lilith was no accident. It was carefully constructed, like a wall built stone by stone over the centuries. In canonical texts, the story begins directly with Eve, as if there had been no other woman before her. This choice is not innocent. By eliminating Lilith from the official record, religious authorities erased not just a character, but an entire symbol of insubordination and autonomy. Leaving her story behind the scenes was a way of ensuring that the model of womanhood that would reach the people would be one of obedience and dependence. But the erasure was not complete. While the official Bible remained silent, Lilith continued to whisper in the margins of manuscripts, in apocryphal texts, in rabbinic literature, and later in Kabbalah. These records portrayed her not as the ideal wife, but as a restless spirit, sometimes demonic, sometimes protective, depending on the tradition. In medieval folklore, she had already assumed a multitude of forms: the forbidden lover, the witch of the night, the devourer of newborns, but also the guardian of pregnant women who secretly invoked her. This contrast is revealing. It shows that while official discourse attempted to shape a single narrative, there were other voices, more discreet, almost subterranean, that kept a different version alive. It's as if two Liliths coexisted, the feared villain and the figure of power. This duality was disturbing because it exposed a hidden truth. No matter how much one tries to control a story, it never ceases to belong to those who receive and retell it. The criteria for deciding what would remain in or out of sacred texts were often political. It wasn't just about doctrinal purity, but also about preserving power structures. A woman who abandoned her man and lived alone, who refused submission and sought alliances outside the system, could not be presented as an example. She needed to be removed, or at most, turned into a warning against disobedience. This decision shaped not only theology, but also the collective mindset about the role of women for centuries. And yet, Lilith's presence never completely disappeared. In each new generation, she reappeared with a different name, a different face, adapting to the imagination of the time, as if, no matter how hard they tried to bury her, the very essence of her story was impossible to suffocate. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding how and why these narratives were filtered gives us clues about what they really wanted to prevent from being known. Today, centuries after being silenced in the official pages, Lilith walks freely in the modern imagination. She has ceased to be merely a fragment of lost text or a folkloric figure, and has become a living symbol, reinterpreted and reinvented in various languages. In art, she appears painted with a defiant gaze and erect body, and her hair loose like a flag of independence. In music, she is invoked as a force that inspires rebellion and passion. In literature, she appears sometimes as a hidden heroine, sometimes as an anti-heroine who questions the foundations of a world constructed to control women's narratives. Feminism has revived her as an archetype of resistance. It's not just about celebrating a mythological character, but about reclaiming the original meaning of her story. The woman who prefers exile to submission, who breaks with her assigned role and decides to write her own journey. This reinterpretation has given Lilith new layers, making her a mirror for debates about autonomy, sexuality, and female power. She is no longer the cursed figure who threatens homes and families. Now, for many, she is the face of those who face the consequences of saying no when everyone expects a yes. It's curious to note how, even in the contemporary world, the echo of his image still provokes intense reactions. In some cultures, his name remains associated with danger. In others, it's emblazoned on t-shirts, book covers, and tattoos, conveying a sense of empowerment. This duality shows that the myth has never been static. It adapts to the times, absorbs new interpretations, and at the same time keeps alive the original tension between fascination and fear. In academia, Lilith is studied not only as a character, but also as a cultural phenomenon. Her trajectory, from clay to demonization, from erasure to reappropriation, reveals much about how history is used as a tool of control, and how at times it is also an instrument of liberation. Between the lines of these analyses, a hidden truth emerges. Every attempt to silence a voice can, in the long run, make it even more powerful. The impact of this redefinition is visible behind the scenes in pop culture and politics. Lilith is used to question norms, spark debate, and expose the fragility of structures that, for centuries, seemed unshakable. She is at once memory and rupture, a reminder of a past shaped by censorship, and a harbinger of a future where stories like hers will no longer be silenced. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding what the figure of Lilith represents today can help us understand how ancient symbols still influence mentalities and decisions in the present. What Lilith's story tells us, even after millennia of distortion, is that certain voices disturb us not because of what they do, but because of what they represent. Lilith was dangerous not because she physically threatened Eden, but because her mere existence disrupted the official narrative. She was no accident in ancient texts. She was a living challenge to the structures that were supposed to keep everything in place, including the place of women. If the silence about her was so meticulously constructed, it leads us to wonder how many other stories were shaped or erased to maintain a convenient order. The weight of this reflection is even greater when we realize that the strategies used to silence Lilith continue to be used today. It's no longer about clay tablets or manuscripts, but about controlling narratives, about choosing who gets space and who is relegated to the margins. Erasure can come disguised as omission, irony, or labels that transform a person into a caricature so that their voice loses strength. And this shows us that the myth of Lilith is not just an ancient legend. It is also a mirror of our own time. When we look back and see how she went from being an equal to Adam to a symbol of evil, we see a pattern. Every time someone challenges a dominant model, the reaction is to try to redefine their image so that they appear dangerous, undesirable, or untrustworthy. This is a mechanism that repeats itself behind the scenes of history, in political decisions, and in cultural filters. And precisely for this reason, reviving Lilith is more than revisiting a myth, it's breaking a cycle. Her journey reminds us that stories have power, and that a story's power lies not only in what it tells, but in what it leaves out. By reclaiming voices like hers, we open space for other narratives that have also been buried under the weight of convenience. Lilith, with her decision not to submit, remains an invitation to question, who is writing the version you know, and what does that version want you to believe? Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because Lilith's true strength may not lie in what she lived, but in what her memory provokes every time someone dares to say that they prefer the uncomfortable truth to comfortable silence. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. So take advantage and subscribe to the channel, because this is where we continue unearthing these voices and revealing what was hidden between the lines. Leave a like too, not only because it helps the video, but because it's the simplest way to show that this type of content is worth continuing. And to let me know you've followed this journey with me to the end, write in the comments, this story needed to be told. There's a video right here that complements this topic, and we'll delve even deeper into what we discussed today. Click and follow me there.